Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim, of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeraham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Also the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it was, year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? So Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord, and she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. And it happened, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli watched her mouth. And Hannah spoke in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, How long will you be drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered and said, No, my lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition, which you have asked of him. And she said, Let your maidservant find favour in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Then they arose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord, and returned and came to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked for him from the Lord. Now the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow, but Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, Not until the child is weaned. Then I will take him, that he may appear before the Lord, and remain there forever. So Elkanah her husband said to her, Do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only let the Lord establish his word. Then the woman stayed and nursed her son until she had weaned him. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with 3 bulls, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered a bull, and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my lord, as your soul lives, my lord, I am the woman who stood by you here, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore I also have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. So they worshipped the Lord there. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together from 1 Samuel chapter 1, the beginning of the story of Samuel, and the transition of Israel from being a confederacy to being a kingdom. And this in turn leads to the great kingdoms of the world, the initiative being with God to establish these kingdoms. We've had a period where Samson was judge, and now Eli is judge in Israel. Eli is also the priest, with his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. The worship of the Lord is focused at Shiloh, which is in the hills of Ephraim. The word tabernacle is actually a word palace or temple. So it would seem that although the tabernacle was there, some kind of permanent structure had been built for the worship of the Lord. Although we have no details of it, and it is obviously not as grand as that which Solomon would subsequently build. Nevertheless, the worship of the Lord had been focused at Shiloh for 400 years, and there was some kind of major building there. We have the story of a man of Ephraim, Elkanah, who had two wives. One bore him children and the other didn't. But in terms of his relationship with them, he had particular affinity for Hannah, who had no children. And this frustrated her greatly, not the least because the other wife, Peninnah, mocked her for failing to produce children. And much as she would have liked to, children never came. And so it was when they came up to Shiloh to worship the Lord, that Hannah expressed her great desire and bitterness of soul to the Lord. There were tears, there was great anguish, and in her prayer she made a promise to the Lord. O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. In the case of Samson, the angel of the Lord directed that Samson should not have his hair cut, but that he should be dedicated to the Lord as a Nazirite. But here we have Hannah offering her son as a Nazirite to the Lord all the days of his life. So the practice of the Nazirite vows was still being practiced, and the story of Samson no doubt had inspired this commitment by Hannah. She would offer her son if the Lord would give him. Now Eli observed her praying and saw her mouth speaking and thought she was drunk, but she wasn't drunk. And when he reprimanded her and she explained the situation, he said, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition." So having had that response from the priest, she knew her prayer was heard, with confidence that the Lord would answer her prayer. She was no longer sad. She knew she had the petition that she had made to the Lord, even though nothing had happened yet. But in due course she became pregnant, and she named the son who was born Samuel, which means heard by God. Samuel would be heard by God, but he was born because God heard Hannah's prayer. And when he was weaned, she brought him up to Shiloh, presented him to Eli, explained this was the miracle child that God had given her for the Lord's service, and offered burnt sacrifices of praise to the Lord. And so Samuel stayed with Eli. The New Testament encourages us to bring our petitions to the Lord with thanksgiving, that we might know the peace of God in our heart. This is the confidence we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, then we know that we have the petitions that we have desired of him.